There is something you do every single day that you cannot explain. Maybe it is the first coffee before your brain fully wakes up. Maybe it is scrolling through your phone before you have even gotten out of bed. Maybe it is something darker than that. Something you have tried to stop. Something you have promised yourself more than once that tomorrow will be different. And tomorrow comes, and nothing changes. You have been told this is weakness, a character flaw, a failure of discipline. The story your culture tells about addiction is a moral one, that the people who cannot stop simply do not want to stop badly enough, that if they truly tried, if they truly cared, they would find a way. That story is wrong. It has always been wrong. And the science that proves it wrong is one of the most important and most ignored discoveries of the last 50 years. Your brain was not hijacked by addiction. Your brain was built for it. To understand why, you need to understand one of the most extraordinary systems in the human body, a system so ancient, so powerful, and so central to everything you do, that without it, you would not be able to get out of bed in the morning. You would not be able to feel pleasure, desire, motivation, or love. You would not be able to learn. You would not be able to survive. It is called the dopamine system, and it is the key to everything. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger that carries signals between brain cells. It is produced in a small cluster of neurons deep in the brain called the ventral tegmental area, and it travels outward to a region called the nucleus accumbens, which neuroscientists sometimes call the brain's reward center. When this circuit fires, you feel something, not just pleasure, something more specific than pleasure. You feel the desire to do something again. This is the critical distinction that most people miss. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. That is a myth. Dopamine is the wanting chemical. It does not make you feel good. It makes you need to go back. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan has spent decades unpacking this distinction. He calls it the difference between wanting and liking. Liking is the actual experience of pleasure, the warmth, the satisfaction, the enjoyment. Wanting is the drive, the craving, the compulsion to pursue. And these two systems, he found, are neurologically separate. You can want something desperately without liking it at all. You can be trapped in wanting without ever reaching the satisfaction of liking. This is the architecture of addiction. Now think about why this system exists. Think about what it was designed for. Your ancestors lived in an environment of scarcity. Food was not guaranteed. Calories were precious. A ripe piece of fruit hanging from a tree was not just a snack. It was survival. The brain needed a system that would make your ancestors not just eat the fruit, but obsessively seek it out, remember where they found it, and return again and again. The dopamine system was that mechanism. It evolved to make certain survival behaviors feel so compelling, so necessary, so urgent, that your ancestors could not ignore them. Eat sugar. Feel the dopamine spike. Want more sugar. Return to the source. Survive. It worked for hundreds of thousands of years. And then, very recently in evolutionary terms, something happened that the system was never designed to handle. Humans learned to manufacture dopamine spikes on demand. Alcohol produces a flood of dopamine that no natural food source could replicate. Cocaine blocks the reuptake of dopamine entirely, causing levels in the brain to skyrocket to 10 times their normal range. Opioids trigger dopamine release while simultaneously binding to receptors that control pain, producing a sensation that the brain has no natural equivalent for. Methamphetamine causes the brain to release enormous quantities of dopamine and then prevents it from being cleared, leaving the circuits flooded for hours. These substances do not create a new response in the brain. They hijack an existing one. They speak to the dopamine system in a language it already understands, the language of reward, of survival, of return. But they shout it at a volume the system was never built to process. Psychiatrist Nora Volkow, director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, has spent her career imaging the brains of people with addiction using PET scans. What she found is not the brain of a person making bad choices. It is a brain that has been structurally altered. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for judgment, decision-making, and impulse control, shows dramatically reduced activity in people with severe addiction. Not because they were born that way, because the dopamine system, flooded repeatedly with artificial signals, began to compensate. This is the process called downregulation. When the brain is repeatedly overwhelmed by dopamine, it does something logical. It reduces the number of dopamine receptors available. It turns down the sensitivity of the system to protect itself from overstimulation. And this is where the trap closes. Because now the brain that has been flooded with artificial dopamine spikes is less sensitive to dopamine than it was before. The natural rewards that once felt satisfying, food, connection, sunlight, achievement, no longer register in the same way. The baseline has shifted. The brain now requires more stimulation just to feel normal, and the only thing that provides that stimulation is the substance itself. This is not a choice. This is chemistry. This is the brain doing exactly what brains do when they encounter a signal that is too strong for too long, adapting, compensating, surviving in the only way it knows how. Psychologist Bruce Alexander at Simon Fraser University conducted one of the most famous experiments in addiction research in the 1970s. He built something called Rat Park, a large, enriched environment filled with food, toys, tunnels, and other rats to socialize with. He gave rats in this environment access to both plain water and morphine-laced water. Then he compared them to rats kept in isolation in standard cages with the same two water sources. The isolated rats drank the morphine water compulsively. They consumed it in large quantities and showed clear signs of dependence. The rats in Rat Park almost exclusively drank the plain water. Even rats who had already become dependent on morphine in isolation chose plain water when moved to Rat Park. The substance had not changed. The environment had. Alexander's conclusion was radical for its time and remains controversial today. Addiction, he argued, is not primarily a property of the drug. It is primarily a response to the absence of meaningful connection, stimulation, and purpose. The brain does not become addicted because it is weak. It becomes addicted because it is doing exactly what it was designed to do, seeking the most reliable source of dopamine available in the environment it finds itself in. When the environment is rich, the brain finds dopamine in relationships, in achievement, in discovery, in play. When the environment is impoverished, when it is lonely or painful or empty of meaning, the brain will find dopamine wherever it can, and substances offer it reliably, immediately, and without the effort that natural rewards require. Think about what that means for the people in your life who struggle with addiction. Think about what it means for you. This is not a story about moral failure. It is a story about a brain doing its best in a world it was not built for. A dopamine system that evolved to pursue survival rewards in an environment of scarcity, now operating in an environment of manufactured plenty, finding the most powerful signal available and following it, the way it has always been designed to do. The British physician Gabor Mate, who spent years working with people with severe addiction in Vancouver's downtown east side, puts it this way: the question is never why the addiction. The question is always why the pain. Because underneath every addiction, in every person, is a brain that was looking for something. Relief, connection, sensation. A moment of not feeling what it had been feeling. The substance was never the point. The substance was the solution to a problem the person had not found another way to solve. And that reframes everything. It reframes how you look at the person sleeping on the street with a bottle in their hand. It reframes how you look at the executive who cannot stop gambling. It reframes how you look at yourself when you reach for the thing you promised you would put down, because something in your brain is signaling, loudly, urgently, in the only language evolution gave it, that it needs what it always needed, Not the substance, not the screen, not the sugar. Relief, connection, a reason to feel that the world is worth being in. That is what your brain was built to find. That is what it has always been looking for. The addiction was never the disease. The addiction was the brain's best answer to a question it did not know how to stop asking.